In the summer of 1896, a heat wave settled over the eastern United States for 10 straight days and killed close to 1,500 people, most of them in New York City tenements with no way to cool a single room. Air conditioning existed nowhere in a home in 1896. It would not exist anywhere at all for another 6 years. And yet people had been surviving brutal summers in hot climates for centuries before that heat wave, in houses built specifically to fight the heat without a single machine. The knowledge for doing that did not disappear by accident. It was engineered out of the house on purpose, and almost nobody today has been taught what was lost. To understand what passive cooling actually is, you have to stop thinking of a house as a box and start thinking of it as a machine for moving air. Hot air is lighter than cool air, and it always rises. That single fact, used deliberately, is the engine behind almost every cooling trick a pre-electric builder had. Builders called it the stack effect, and it works exactly like a chimney, except the chimney is the entire house. Warm air collects at the ceiling and escapes through a high opening. As it leaves, it pulls cooler air in behind it through a low opening, and the house ventilates itself with no fan and no motor. The first architectural feature built to exploit this was hiding in plain sight above almost every interior door in a 19th century house. A transom, a small hinged or fixed window set directly above a doorframe, often no larger than a single pane of glass. On its own, a transom looks decorative. Its actual job was to let hot air pass from room to room instead of stagnating behind a closed door. A house full of transoms became one connected column of air, stairwell to hallway to bedroom, all of it feeding upward and out through a vent or a cupola at the roofline. Builders in hot, humid regions took the same idea and applied it to an entire porch. Beginning in the late 1800s, a specific feature started appearing on houses across the American South and the humid parts of the Midwest: the sleeping porch. A screened, roofed porch, often on the second floor, built specifically for a family to drag their beds onto during the hottest months and sleep outdoors, protected from insects but fully exposed to the night air. The sleeping porch was not purely an engineering solution. It arrived at the exact moment the parallel medical movement was pushing fresh air as a cure. Physicians in the era before antibiotics believed, correctly in part, that fresh circulating air helped fight tuberculosis and reduce the spread of influenza indoors. Sanatoriums built entire wards with walls that opened fully to outside air, and the sleeping porch brought that same fresh air principle home to an ordinary family bedroom. An indoor bedroom at night in a pre-air conditioned house could sit 10 to 15 degrees hotter than the air just outside the walls, because brick, plaster and wood all absorb heat through the day and release it slowly after dark. A sleeping porch had none of that stored heat. Thin screens, no mass, open on 3 sides. It cooled the moment the sun went down, hours before the rest of the house caught up. By the 1920s, sleeping porches appeared on pattern book house plans across the country, sold as a standard feature rather than a regional oddity. But the single most complete piece of passive cooling architecture in American building history was not a porch bolted onto a house. It was a house built entirely around a gap. Architectural historians call it the dogrot house, and it appears across the upland south from the Carolinas through Texas, beginning in the late 1700s. The design is almost absurdly simple. 2 separate log or frame rooms, built a short distance apart, sharing one continuous roof, with a fully open, breezy hallway running straight through the middle between them. That open central passage is the dogtrot itself, named, by most accounts, for the family dog that could trot straight through the house from front yard to back. One room typically held the kitchen and the working hearth. The other held the sleeping quarters, deliberately separated so that cooking heat never built up where the family slept. The dogtrot corridor between them caught any breeze moving across the property and funneled it, compressed and accelerated, straight through the center of the house. It is the same principle as pinching a garden hose to make the water shoot further. Narrow the opening a moving fluid has to pass through, and its speed increases. A dogtrot hallway on a still, humid southern afternoon could feel noticeably breezier than the open yard around it, purely from that funneling effect. Families used the dogtrot as the working center of the house through the hottest months. Meals eaten there, chores done there, and often beds dragged into it at night. It combined the stack effect of a transom, the open exposure of a sleeping porch, and a wind tunnel in a single structural gap that cost the builder nothing but 2 rooms and a shared roof. The breezeway, a covered but open-sided passage connecting a house to a detached kitchen or a barn, applied the same funneling principle at a smaller scale and served a second purpose besides. Kitchens were frequently built as separate structures in hot climates specifically, so that a wood-fired hearth never added its heat to the rooms where a family lived and slept. The breezeway let a family cross between the two without stepping fully outside, while still keeping the heat source physically detached from the house. None of these features worked alone. A properly built hot climate house from this era layered 5 or 6 passive strategies on top of each other, and every layer mattered. Deep roof overhangs were cut to a specific angle, calculated so they blocked the high, direct summer sun from ever reaching the windows, while still letting the lower winter sun in to warm the house when heat was welcome. Wraparound porches did the same job on a larger scale, shading the entire exterior wall so the brick or wood siding itself never absorbed the full force of afternoon sun. Ceilings were built unusually tall, often 11 or 12 feet, specifically to give rising hot air somewhere to collect well above head height before it escaped. Windows were placed directly opposite one another whenever possible, so that a breeze entering one side of a room had a clear, unobstructed path straight through and out the other. Houses were oriented on the lot with real care, ideally with the long axis facing the direction of the prevailing summer breeze, so cross-ventilation had wind to work with in the first place. In parts of the Deep South, thick masonry walls served a completely different function than they do further north. Instead of holding heat in, they were used to hold heat out. Dense material like brick or tabby concrete absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly. In a hot climate, that lag can be turned to an advantage. A thick wall heated by the sun through the day would not fully transfer that heat to the interior until well after dark, by which point the outside air had already begun to cool, and the stored heat simply radiated back outward instead. None of this required electricity, a compressor, or a single moving mechanical part. It required only a correct reading of the sun, the wind, and the specific climate of one particular piece of land. Willis Carrier built the first modern air conditioning unit in 1902, and for decades afterward it remained an industrial tool, cooling printing presses and textile mills, not homes. Home air conditioning did not become common in ordinary American houses until after the Second World War, and it did not become the default in new construction until the 1960s and 1970s. Once it did, something happened to house design that almost nobody planned and almost nobody now remembers as a trade-off. Builders stopped needing deep overhangs, cross-ventilation, or careful orientation because a compressor in a box outside could brute force any house cool regardless of how badly it was designed for its climate. Sleeping porches were the first casualty. Enclosed, insulated, and converted into ordinary bedrooms or storage because nobody needed to sleep outdoors anymore. Transoms were papered over or removed outright during renovations because a house with central air did not need interior rooms to share air with each other at all. The dogrot itself, the single most sophisticated passive cooling design the country ever produced, was largely abandoned as an inefficient use of a floor plan once mechanical cooling made the open gap between the two rooms unnecessary. Later builders sometimes enclosed that central breezeway entirely, turning 2 separate cabins and a shaded corridor into one continuous air-conditioned room. The architectural historian who first gave the dogrot serious academic attention, Fred Niffen, was documenting a building type that was already vanishing by the time he wrote about it in the mid-20th century. What disappeared was not only a set of building techniques, a social pattern disappeared along with them. The front porch, the sleeping porch, and the dogrot hallway were not private retreats. They were the place a family sat in the evening, where neighbors stopped to talk, where the outdoor and indoor halves of daily life still touched. Air conditioning let a family close the windows, close the door, and spend a hot evening entirely indoors and entirely alone, and within a generation that had become the ordinary way to live. Energy researchers have since put a number on exactly what was traded away for that convenience. Air conditioning now accounts for roughly a fifth of total electricity use in American homes during peak summer months, and demand climbs sharply during precisely the heat waves. A dogrot house was originally built to survive without any electricity at all. When the power grid fails during a heat wave, a fully sealed, mechanically cooled modern house with no cross-ventilation and no shading strategy can become dangerously hot within hours, in a way a well-built passive house from 1850 never would. That vulnerability is exactly why architects and builders have begun deliberately reintroducing these techniques, not as nostalgia, but as engineering. Deep overhangs, operable transom-style vents, and cross-ventilated floor plans are appearing again in new construction specifically marketed for resilience during extended power outages. Some architects have gone further and built modern houses that directly reference the dogrot form, with a central open-air breezeway connecting 2 enclosed wings, air conditioning included but rarely needed in the shoulder seasons. The old builders never had thermodynamics textbooks. What they had was several generations of trial and error in one specific climate, passed down until the failures were bred out of the design entirely. A dogrot house built in 1820 in the Alabama Hill Country and a sleeping porch built in 1910 in Georgia were solving the exact same equation with nothing more than a roofline, an opening, and an understanding of which way the air wanted to move. The equation has not changed since. Hot air still rises, breezes still funnel through narrow openings, and thick walls still lag behind the sun by several hours. What changed is that a machine made it possible to stop asking the question, right up until the exact moment the machine stops working and the question comes due again.